Well, hello everyone. Thank you for tuning in to our webinar. My name is Connor Hartman, and welcome to Conestoga Wealth Partners' Outbehave the Herd. We're going to talk to you about several different biases that investors tend to have that normally serve us pretty well and just maybe not quite as well when it comes to the investing world. We'll be getting started in just a moment, but before we get too far underway, a brief round of introductions are in order. First, we have AJ Tebow, Certified Financial Planner and Managing Partner at Conestoga Wealth Partners. He's been an advisor since 1995, founded Conestoga in 2010. We also have Jim Shockman, Certified Investment Management Analyst, and he's a co-founder of Conestoga with AJ. He's been an advisor since 1987. And then Perry McLean also joins us with 34 years of experience as a financial advisor. As you can see, a tremendous amount of knowledge and experience here. And finally, my name again is Connor Hartman. I've been a financial advisor at Conestoga since becoming part of the team in 2016 after graduating from Duke with a degree in economics. So welcome panelists. Today, we're excited to, again, discuss some of the tendencies and the methods we have as humans for making choices, some of which can lead people off course with investing, even though they usually work really well. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into this. How many of us can say we were traveling maybe in an unusual area and relied on Google Maps for a crowdsourced solution to your next meal? I know I have. I prefer like some place with 4 stars, at least 50 reviews. And how about going online, maybe looking for the top 10 best places to visit somewhere, or maybe the best running shoes to buy, the best gardening gloves to find on the market. And social media, I mean, what we see is often based on how much other people like something. And this works great most of the time. Following the crowd, however, doesn't always work as well in the investing world. So, AJ, maybe you can jump into the investing piece of this and explain how it relates to emotion.
Yeah, so I mean, all of us have been through lots of different market cycles, and we're always talking to clients throughout these times, and it's just interesting the types of feelings that clients will go through during these times. If you look at the top of the first peak there, euphoria, we could think back to 2007, 2008. Things were perceived to be pretty good. Economy was seemingly doing pretty well. People were happy. Everybody was, had a job. People were making money in the markets. It's euphoria, right? But then things start to happen, and the markets start getting volatile, people start getting afraid, and fear turns into desperation. And at some point, people are at the bottom, or what we perceive to be the bottom after losses, significant losses. There's depression. There's something we call capitulation, where people just finally say, you know what, I've had enough, get me out, sell everything. So it's just interesting the different feelings that people go through these market cycles.
Absolutely.
And this just applies that, these different feelings to different market cycles. Looking at the S&P 500 going back to 2004, again, we can see up there euphoria, people were happy, and then down towards the bottom, the beginning of 2009, where we saw that capitulation and desperation. But what's interesting is that it took a few years before people started being optimistic again, but by then we were back up to where we started before we started the downslide.
Yep. Makes a lot of sense there. Perry, maybe you could touch base on what these emotions that AJ's talking about, what in the broader context that means.
Yeah, behavioral finance is really where your psyche intersects with your decision-making process when it comes to financial decisions. A way to look at that is a simple example would be, and it's not financial, but you go into a grocery store and there's two lines and you're a customer, and then you sit and you decide, I'm going to go to the right line because it looks like they're checking out faster. And then all of a sudden it takes you longer than the line on the left that you originally didn't choose, and you wonder, well, why didn't I make that decision? So it kind of involves making decisions based on information that's not necessarily accurate.
Absolutely. And maybe you can touch base on this too, Perry, about that over time.
Sure. One of the things I was a major in college was a psychology major, and recently studies have shown that our wiring in our brain is set by repetitive activities, and we can reprocess our brain as well. But when you start to make inaccurate decisions based on bad information, you kind of develop a roadmap for continuing to do that. So one of the things that we're challenging those listeners today is to look at areas in which maybe you have made some inaccurate decisions, and how to look at changing those decisions in the future.
Precisely. Jim, maybe you can touch base on this and weigh in as well on the technological piece of it.
Yeah, of course, I'd be happy to. I know that technology really has dramatically changed the way we live and interact and work and manage our lives. And really it can feel overwhelming. In the old days, if you wanted to talk, you just picked up the phone. I remember when I was young, we had a party line. And some of you might remember what that was like. I know you don't, Connor. Seeing someone on the phone as you speak and interact back when I was a kid was the stuff of science fiction. Now we're just bombarded with information using algorithms specifically targeted to our personalities and our biases. And basically we're nudged into doing this or doing that. And it's definitely, it's a different world now.
Well said. So in our personal experience, that wraps into that as well, Jim, right?
Well, it does. We all rely on intuitive shortcuts or rules of thumb that do work for us most of the time. And when I say all of us, I include advisors. We're all subject to these things, and we have a way of doing things. To stop and think and question why we're doing what we're doing is not easy. And changing can be even more difficult, especially as we get older. It's important to realize that we all have biases, and for the most part, they are helpful. We all have strengths and weaknesses, brilliant in some ways and maybe not so much in others. I can imagine someone like Einstein having difficulty finding their car keys.
Yeah, I'm sure even brilliant Einstein had a few issues. There's a few behaviors in particular that we're going to focus on today. I'm sure each of us as advisors, like you said, Jim, we can remember times when maybe we've done these things ourselves, or we've seen investors do this. We're by no means perfect, but we have a few structures in place to help avoid these pitfalls. But there's always that risk, and we're going to go ahead and jump right into some of these. The first one being anchoring bias, which is actually one of my favorites to talk about. I see it all the time. Anchoring is basically being given information and then allowing that first bit of information to influence us more than it should, even as we start to get more info and we start to develop a bigger picture of what's going on. I actually love the example on this slide. If I walk into the store and I see something that's 80% off, of course, it's going to pique my interest, right? What a deal. But never mind the fact that it should never have been quoted at that price in the first place. But when we contextualize that on sale price with the first piece, despite ourselves, it feels more valuable. And I don't know about you, AJ, but I still wouldn't buy myself a new pair of heels for $199.
Well, I don't know. I think they look quite nice.
I want to see that.
But we see this in investing all the time. I mean, investors, they say the price is down. It was at this price 6 months ago, and now it's only at this price. It must be a good time to buy. But it isn't just about how much the price used to be. You know, sometimes there's a great reason why something has dropped in value, and you don't necessarily want to be a part of that reason. Confirmation bias. Jim, maybe you could tackle that for us.
I'd love to. You know, simply put, we all tend to look for things that reinforce what we already think and believe. I think to do otherwise creates stress. I heard a story once. Ben Franklin decided he was going to swear off eating meat because it was unethical. But he really loved cod, and he justified eating the cod by saying that they ate other fish, and so it was okay to eat such an unethical animal. We are all really good at rationalizing and justifying our actions. I say all of us, and I'm including myself.
Absolutely. That's good stuff. And then recency bias. Jim, could you tackle that for us too?
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk just a little bit about it. Basically, when people were asked, they did a survey, and they asked people, they've done this a number of times, but this was a few years back. When people were asked how much you should worry about things like mad cow, terrorism, alligator attacks, floods, bird flu, and of course now we've got COVID, the most recent one is what most people will say worries them the most.
Interesting.
And you know, recency bias, you know, we don't really learn from history a lot of times, and we're all subject to that. We either get too fearful or greedy, and we don't always make the best decisions, and usually, as Warren Buffett says, we regret it.
Absolutely. AJ, maybe you could tackle herding bias for us.
Yeah, this is an easy one for me because a lot of you know I have farm animals, cattle and horses and goats, and all of them are herd animals. So that's where this comes from, and it's interesting watching these animals. If you ever want to do something relaxing, watch cattle. But if one sees something, even if it's a bird or a squirrel, anything that they perceive that they're to be a threat to them, they'll take off running, and all of the other ones do the same thing. They may not have seen the same thing. They just know that one of their herd is running away, so they all follow it because there's perceived safety in numbers, and they all want to be together because that's where they feel safe, even though there may be no logic to that decision. And it also makes me think of a class that I took in college called critical thinking, and it was a study of logical fallacies or infallacies. And a lot of what we're talking about today are those types of logical fallacies. It's human nature to want to do something during times like this. You see, one of the cattle running away, instead of doing the same thing they're doing without any reason, it's human nature to want to do something. Well, during these times, like we're talking about, these market cycles that get people anxious, one thing to take action with is maybe do some rebalancing. Where you're selling from the things that aren't doing well at the time and buying into the things that are selling from the things that are doing well and buying into the things that aren't doing well. It's counterintuitive, right? But Warren Buffett said, "I'll tell you how to become rich. Close the doors, be fearful when others are greedy, and be greedy when others are fearful."
Well said. Absolutely. So another bias that we see a lot is something called ambiguity aversion. And it's a fancy way for us basically saying we prefer certainty. We like guarantees. We like knowing the information that we're getting into. We tend to avoid unknowns. And in the investing world, however, there really isn't a free lunch. If you want to remove unknowns from an investment, you usually have to give up something in return. A lot of times that ends up being some of the reward, maybe some of that investment return that we're looking for. And that isn't necessarily a bad thing. Some of our clients prefer very few unknowns with their investments. The trap, however, is that if you're not careful, it can derail your financial plan. If you're investing too conservatively, it can push you into having to save more money to accomplish your goals, or maybe spending less money down the road. So we want to make sure that we strike a balance with the investing that we're doing, and making sure we're not giving up too many of those risks in order to maybe feel good about what we're doing. And then loss aversion. Maybe AJ, you could tackle this one.
Yeah, I'm finishing up a pretty good book right now called The Power of Moments, and it talks about how memories affect people's emotions. But when we apply these concepts to investing, and our experience is true, we find that a $1,000 gain, if somebody has $1,000 gain, they're excited. But if they have $1,000 loss, it feels like a $2,000 loss. So the impact of a loss is far greater than the impact of a gain.
Yep. It hurts more.
Pain avoiding creatures.
That's right. And AJ, what do you think about how this relates to your portfolio evaluation?
Well, in a previous life, I was a real estate appraiser, and if people were to value their real estate on a daily basis, they would find that the valuation fluctuates just as much as stocks do, really. But people don't do that. They value real estate every 3, 4, 5 years, and they see growth over that time generally. But the issue that we have today is like Jim was saying, we're bombarded with information, and we're valuing the value of investments on a daily or even minute by minute basis. And that's really not a good idea, because if we're buying quality investments, we don't care what they do in the next month. We're looking at it because it's a good investment over the next 5 years, right? I don't know who said this, but a good saying along these lines is investing should be more like watching paint dry or watching grass grow. If you want excitement, take $800 and go to Las Vegas.
It's a better place to have some fun. I've always thought our job should be pretty boring for the most part if we're doing it right. So what AJ is talking about, a lot of this ties into market volatility. A lot of our biases, all the ones that we've been talking about, the stock market will actually exaggerate a lot of those biases. One of the things that I hear and see a lot are headlines, things like the Dow plummets 500 points in a single day, or something else that's kind of sensationalist. A reasonable person that's reading that headline, without knowing all the jargon or information about investing, they're probably still going to think things aren't going that well. But what this graph right here tells us is that little market fluctuations like that happen all the time. It's actually perfectly normal. And it's certainly not something to lose sleep over. Again, the media loves to create headlines like this. It's what gets people to click and read. We just want to make sure that we recognize what it actually is saying when we see some of these headlines. And, this is part of the bigger problem that we face. I mean, like Jim was saying earlier with technology, things are changing so quickly. We're constantly interacting with some of these headlines, new information, and on the internet, everybody's yelling for your attention. There's just so much information, and not all of it is really that helpful. We find it easier these days to be overwhelmed with information that doesn't really matter that much. And then the good info, meanwhile, is often buried. It's harder to find. And we as humans, we have a habit of we make decisions by first going to find more information on the subject. And that's a great idea to an extent. The drawback is when you find yourself, and I know I've done this before, you find yourself a few hours into researching something and you're sidetracked down a rabbit hole and you're feeling no closer to making your decision than when you started. You know, and with the incredible amount of info at our fingertips, it's just easier than ever to fall into that trap. So, and keeping emotion in check. Perry, could you tackle this for us?
Sure. There's kind of a lot going on in these three slides, but really what it's saying is there was a company that did a study called Dalbar and actually repeated it a number of times. And what they took a look at was people who were stock market investors on the far left side, the returns on their accounts versus the returns on the market itself. And you can see the 9.96% return was higher than the average return for the same people who invested in the stock market during the same period of time. And the long and short of that says that people probably got out of the market during certain periods and they weren't able to recapture that total return that being fully invested had to offer. Now, that's not to say that you don't make adjustments to your portfolio over time and rebalance, as we've discussed earlier. And we know that each of you have an independent and unique way of looking at your own personal investments, and they're designed for you. But it still is a good evidence that sometimes if we're left to our own devices, we can zig when we should have zagged, probably.
Yeah, this is a pretty stark difference. Wow. So we've just covered several different biases here. And, you know, there's a couple main things that we can do to help try to prevent some of these from leading us to mistakes that we're making during the investing process. AJ, you can chime in on this with me, but, you know, I think one of the main takeaways we can find here is, you know, don't be afraid to be a little different, right? I mean, being a contrarian can serve us well sometimes. And then maybe in addition to that, remember that we're investing for the long term. We want to stick to a plan of some kind, some type of goal that we have, and then stick to it and remember that when we're maybe in that dark place during some of the investing cycles. AJ, you want to add to that?
Well, I'm looking forward to the day where I'll look out in the pasture and see one cow run or a couple cows run away when one's standing there looking at them wondering, what are you guys doing? You know, as humans, we have a higher level of thinking, right? We can approach these decisions logically and you know, analyze the facts and not necessarily do what everybody else is doing, because our outcomes really should be based on long-term goals. What are we trying to accomplish by doing what we're doing? So yeah.
Great, absolutely. So, and Jim, do you want to add anything to this? Maybe talk about some things that we can do as investors to do better?
Yeah, to tag on to AJ, you know, it's easy. I think most people know what they should do, but when our emotions get involved, we can't help ourselves. And I think one of the most important things that I think AJ and Connor and Barry would agree with is that the first thing you need to do is know yourself. Be honest with yourself. And, you know, what am I good at? What am I not good at? I mean, everybody likes to drive a car, but not everybody likes working on a car. And I think, you know, we have one life, and I think we really want to try to spend our time doing the things that bring the most value to us in life. Panic selling, again, easier said than done. I think the way you avoid panic selling, again, is by having a good plan ahead of time and talking about what you're going to do and how you're going to deal with it. And make sure you have enough cash so you don't have to sell. Try to stay focused. I think just stay focused on your plan. If your plan needs to change it. But I think it's really easy to get distracted. And I think, one of the things, I think we all make better decisions when we have someone else to talk to and we can get another perspective. And I think for an advisor, I would say the plan probably is just as valuable to the advisor, maybe even more so than it is to the client putting the plan together, because it all kind of keeps us on the same page and it helps us to anticipate and give better advice.
I want to just chime in here real quick. And a plan really revolves around either it's a plan, a formal plan, or a goal, or an objective, whether that be retirement or saving for something. So it's not, we're not always just talking about a formal plan. We're talking about a decision that you've made in the future.
Right. It's a good point, Perry. So I guess, how does having an advisor help, Jim?
Well, I think the first thing we need to keep in mind is that, no one, and this is old, and I'm sure probably we've all heard it 100 times, but no one plans to fail, but many of us fail to plan. And it's not always easy. And I know we can't predict the future with absolute certainty. I don't know, maybe perhaps we don't want to stifle our spontaneity. Maybe we don't want to regret making the wrong decision. But I think a good plan, like I said, can help both you and your advisor stay focused, anticipate, and provide thoughtful advice. And I think it's very, very important to know where you're going if you want to get there. And we can adapt, we can change, things change. Weddings, travel. I mean, we all have things that come up. Sometimes they're good things, sometimes they're not good things. But I think a good plan will incorporate all the things that you might see in your life and prepare you for those things. And I think an advisor, again, is just the main benefit of an advisor's experience. I know that I've been around long enough where I've had clients that have gone all the way from retirement, planning for retirement, all the way to the end of life and all the things that involves. And so I think having someone to talk to, having someone to run your ideas by, and having someone with experience that's been there can make a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely. AJ, do you want to maybe any parting thoughts or any things you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I think, the important thing too is keeping things in perspective. I was, a salesperson the other day asked me what I did. I told him, he says, "Oh, the stock market, that's down a lot." And I said, "Well, it depends on your perspective." At that particular time, I think the S&P was down maybe 15, 18%, but the NASDAQ was down nothing. It was flat for the year. So, the media would like us to think that, they hype things up and all of this is happening and it affects all of us, and that's just not true. So I think calling us, talking with us, what we're really good at is putting things in perspective and how all of this applies to you as an individual.
Absolutely. Perry, do you have any parting thoughts on that as well?
No, I think what AJ said is spot on, and I think having a plan, working the plan, having someone to talk to that's been there, that's already either we've made the mistakes ourselves or we had clients that have made the mistakes, and we can really, I think, provide a lot more security as you go through life, and give you someone to talk to. So I would echo what AJ said 100%.
Yeah. Perry, do you have anything bringing us home here?
I think Jim wrapped that up quite nicely.
All right. Excellent. Well, I want to say thank you guys for showing us some of your thoughts and wisdom around some of these biases. Thank you to all of our listeners for joining us today. If anyone has questions, you can feel free to reach out to us. Our contact info is right here. And then we'll be looking at doing some more of these in the future. But thanks, guys. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, everyone.
Be well, be safe.
Okay.